Here you've got Joe Biden's favorite political commentator, which is always very difficult for me to say, Fareed Zakaria over at CNN on Saturday, giving a monologue that Biden almost certainly saw, in which he sounds a very dire warning. Let's take a listen.
None of this is playing out as I thought it would. Trump is now leading in almost all the swing states, but behind those numbers lie even more troubling details. As someone worried about the prospects of a second Trump term, I think it's best to be honest about reality. I understand that polls are not always accurate, but in general, they have tended to underestimate Donald Trump's support, not overestimate it. I doubt that there are many shy Biden voters in the country. Perhaps the most worrying new trend for the Democrats is that far from being the more unified party, they are now bitterly divided over the war in Gaza. Bernie Sanders has said the eruption of pro-Palestinian protests could be Biden's Vietnam, and even invoked the specter of Lyndon Johnson choosing not to run for re-election in 1968 because of the opposition to that war. The analogy is far-fetched. America then was itself sending hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam, with more being recruited from college campuses every week. But there's no denying that the party seems more openly divided than it has been in decades. Only 33% of Americans said they approved of Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, which is now opposed both by people who think he is too soft and people who think he is too hard on Israel. Meanwhile, Republicans seem to be uniting behind Trump. Whatever opposition he faced in the primaries has largely melted away. The one that troubles me the most is on the question of who was the more competent. Joe Biden led Donald Trump by 9 points in 2020, but Trump now leads by 16 points in January 2024.
Look, can't really dispute a single word of what he says. We also have an interesting interview with Charlemagne the God, who did one for the New York Times, interestingly enough, which perhaps represents some of the sentiment that we saw, the bleeding away of black voters for Joe Biden. This is what he had to say about why he won't be endorsing Biden again.
I'm not endorsing because I just feel like I've been burned with that before. You know, because you put your name on the line, you endorse somebody, you tell your audience this is who you should go out there and vote for, and your audience goes and does it, and then when they don't see these things that they thought were going to get pushed through, they don't understand civics. They're not thinking about that. They're like, all they know is Charlemagne told me to vote for this person because this was going to happen, and this didn't happen. I think they said the number's like 22%. I don't think that 22% of black people are going to vote for Donald Trump. I think the biggest thing that people are going to have to fight against this year is the couch. And that's what I've been saying. Yeah. I keep saying it over and over. Like, this election is 3 options. Republicans who are the crooks, Democrats who are the cowards, because they don't fight enough for nothing, and the couch. And the couch is voter apathy.
Crooks versus the cowards versus the couch. That seems
like
pretty astute, to be honest with you.
He's right. I mean, look, the problem is that I actually think a low turnout election plays out in Biden's favor, because it just means that the people who love to vote and who vote in every election, boomers and white suburban ladies, those are the people who are going to vote for Biden. Whereas I think, as we showed back in 2020, high turnout election generally mean, and 2016 too, 2016, millions of people who had not voted since the 1980s came out and voted for Trump. It's part of the reason the polls were so off. They not only came back to the polls, they brought even more people who had never voted before in 2020. If we have a lower turnout election, let's say it was in the 40s or 50% this time around, as opposed to 2/3 last time, I think it plays out in Joe Biden's favor. But look, you never know, right? There's a lot of confounding stuff.
And Charlemagne doesn't bring up any specific issues there, but I know in the past he's talked about, great disappointment over the promises that were made over voting rights in particular, and then there's just, they said that during the election because they wanted to make sure that black voters turn out to the poll and signal that, we're on your side, et cetera. And then to his point about them being cowards, not just on this issue, but on any number of issues that you could take a look at, when they get there, it's just nothing but excuses for why we can't do this, we can't do that. Sorry, we tried, we want to, but we're with you, but it's just too hard. Except when it comes to funding wars. Then, then it happens. Then the bipartisan magic comes together and whatever needs to pass comes to pass. So, you can't blame him for feeling like I was made a set of promises. I trusted that. I made a set of promises in effect to my audience saying, like, I think this is the person who can deliver these things that you're interested in, and I'm just not going to put myself in that position again. You really can't blame him. Just quickly going back to Fareed Zakaria and his commentary about the Israel's assault on Gaza, there were some interesting numbers in this poll as well. They asked the question about who do you sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Democrats now, a plurality sympathize with the Palestinians, which is an extraordinary shift from previous years up to this point. You have 35% who say they sympathize with the Palestinians, over 24% who say they sympathize with the Israelis. The remainder say don't know or both equally. Republicans, very one-sided. 72% sympathize more with Israel, 6% sympathize more with the Palestinians. And the other thing is huge age divide, which won't surprise you guys if you've been watching this coverage. 18 to 29, you got 47% who say we sympathize more with the Palestinians, so very close to a majority. Only 23% say they're with the Israelis. 65 plus, polar opposite. Majority, 55%, were with Israel. Only 14% were with the Palestinians. So you see huge, both partisan and generational divides in terms of how they're viewing this conflict. And to Fareed Zakaria's accurate point, this has really, Joe Biden's policy here is not popular with the Democratic base and has really divided the Democratic coalition and created not just apathy, but utter disgust among some certain portion of that Democratic base. So, these are, when you look at who's fleeing the Biden camp, as we said before, most of those people are actually more on the moderate to conservative side, but of the lefties and progressives who voted for him in 2020 and who have left the Biden camp, it is overwhelmingly over this one issue.
Yeah, look, he's got coalitional problems all over the map. He can't really afford any of them. He's not really inspiring or speaking to the wants, the needs, or the concerns of any. And so you get basically a total collapse. I mean, more and more, this just looks a lot like Jimmy Carter that I've said previously. His only saving grace is some sort of hidden abortion, phenomenon, which is a hell of a thing to bet your entire political future on. That's stunning, but that is the choice that he has decided to make.
Yeah.
It's the most apathetic choice you could possibly make, but it makes sense for some 82-year-old man who would be, if he were to be reelected.
Yeah, they're opting for just running on abortion and Trump is bad, and really avoiding campaigning anywhere where they can see this dissent, including, as we covered yesterday, very possibly moving the entire DNC online to avoid the recriminations from their own voter base. I just, listen, for people who are a little younger, I don't know if you could understand, Obama was the candidate of the college the whole idea was these younger generations are going to be firmly in the Democratic camp. It's done. As they come of age, Republicans are totally screwed. There were books that were, I think it was, James Carville wrote this book, 40 More Years, based on this concept of, these young people are growing up and they'll be a bulk of the voting population and then it's over for the Republicans. So the idea that a Democratic president cannot even go to a college campus, disaster. Utter and complete disaster. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.